Montana Territory, 1876. The train whistle screamed through the valley as the station at Helena filled with steam and dust. And that was the moment Joanna Kessler realized she was about to be sent away like unwanted freight. She gripped her faded carpetbag tighter, the letter crumpled inside it still damp from the tears she refused to let fall now. Her uncle's scrawled words were burned into her mind. "We've done what we can. It's better if you go east. There's a place in Boston for girls like you." Girls like her. Alone. Unwanted. Widowed at 21 and no family left but a tired aunt and an uncle who had run out of patience. Joanna stood stiff in her threadbare dress, the chill of late October biting through the thin wool. The bustle of people around her made it feel worse, like the world was moving on, and she was just stuck there, some forgotten piece of someone else's life. The man who had been paid to escort her to the platform tipped his hat and left without a word. She was meant to be sent away. But then she heard boots on gravel, steady and slow. She turned. A tall man stood a few yards off, broad-shouldered, weather-worn and holding the reins of a chestnut gelding. His tan trail coat was dusted with dirt, the brim of his hat pulled low over sharp gray eyes that met hers and held. "You Joanna Kessler?" he asked, voice low and even. She hesitated. "Yes." He nodded once. "Name's Merritt Shaw. I run cattle west of Red Lodge. Your uncle wired me, said you need a place." She blinked at him. "You're the one hiring girls for house help." "No," he said. "I need no house help." "I offered a home." Joanna stared. "But I was supposed to go to Boston." He lifted one shoulder. "Train's still here if you want it, but I got a spare room, a warm stove, and no one to keep it but me. You want to leave, I'll take you to the station myself tomorrow." She looked at the train, then back at Merritt, and something in her chest eased for the first time in weeks. "I do not want Boston," she said softly. He gave a quiet nod, then offered his hand. "Come on, then." The ride to his ranch took 2 days. The first night they camped near a frozen creek. Merritt built the fire while she unpacked their small meal hardtack, jerky and coffee boiled in his tin pot. He laid his bedroll a respectful distance from hers. Joanna watched him in the firelight. He moved like a man used to the silence, used to long stretches of land and time. But he never once treated her like a burden. When she shivered, he dug out an extra blanket from his pack and handed it over without comment. When she woke from a dream, breath caught in her throat, he simply passed her the canteen and said, "You're safe now." She started to believe him. Merritt's ranch sat low in a valley framed by pine-covered ridges. The house was simple but solid, 2 rooms, a porch, smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood nearby, and a split-rail fence stretched along the pasture where a few dozen cattle grazed. He helped her down from the horse. "Come inside. You can rest." Inside, the fire was already lit. A stew simmered on the stove. There was a quilt folded on the bed she would sleep in, and a shelf with a Bible and a few worn novels. "I did not expect this," Joanna said quietly. He looked at her. "What did you expect?" She shook her head. "I do not know. A shack, cold, indifference." Merritt's voice was steady. "You are not a burden. I do not offer things unless I mean them." She looked at him then, really looked. His face was lined but not old, maybe in his early 30s. His hands were calloused, his jaw rough with a day's growth, but his eyes were kind, steady. "I can earn my keep," she said. "I am not asking you to," he replied, "but you are welcome here for as long as you want." She swallowed hard. "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because someone should have done better by you, and because no one deserves to be thrown away." A week passed. Then another. Joanna found herself rising before dawn, pulling water from the well, helping with meals. Merritt never demanded it, but she wanted to. It felt good to be useful again. She swept the porch, mended a shirt of his that had torn. He noticed. "You sew better than the tailor in town," he said one evening, holding up the shirt. She smiled for the first time in weeks. "He must be a terrible tailor," he chuckled, the sound warm and real. "He is." Each day they spoke more. She asked about his land and he showed her the fence lines. He asked about her late husband and she told him brief but honest. Married too young. He drank too much. Died from fever last spring. "I was not sad," she admitted one night, eyes on the fire. "Is that wrong?" "No," Merritt said. "It means you are still alive." One morning, after a snowfall dusted the land white, she came in from feeding the hens and found him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, kneading bread dough with focused care. She leaned in the doorway. "You bake," he glanced up. "Had to learn. Hired hands are gone come winter." She stepped forward. "May I?" He nodded, and they stood side by side, shaping loaves, their hands brushing once, then again. She flushed, but he did not move away. "You could have let me go to Boston," she said suddenly. "I could have," he said, "but I did not want to." She looked up. "Why?" He did not look away. "Because you looked like someone who needed a home, and I have one." She swallowed. "And now," his voice dropped, "now you do too." The words settled into her chest like warm coals. She stepped forward without thinking and touched his hand. He held it. Neither of them said anything more. But something had shifted. By December, the snow was thick and the nights long. She sat by the fire while he read aloud from a novel she had brought from town. His voice was rough, the words catching sometimes, but she liked listening. She liked being near him. That night, as she folded her blanket beside the hearth, he stopped her. "You do not have to sleep out here anymore," he said. She turned slowly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I cleared the back room for tools. They can stay there. The front room is warmer, and I would like you clothes." Joanna's heart beat fast. "Are you saying?" He stepped closer, gentle but sure. "I am saying I want you with me. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I have come to care for you more than I ever expected." She searched his face. "You mean it?" He cupped her cheek, his hand warm. "Every word." And then, without hesitation, he kissed her, soft, solid, real. Joanna melted into him, arms wrapping around his waist as she kissed him back, all the fear and grief and doubt falling away. She was not being sent anywhere. She was home. The wind carried the scent of pine and frozen earth across the valley as Joanna shook the snow from the cedar branches and gathered kindling into her apron. Her breath clouded in the morning air, and her fingers stung from the cold, but she didn't hurry. There was a stillness to the land that settled into her bones, quiet and sure, the way Merritt's presence had begun to settle into her life. Inside, the fire hadn't died down much from the night before. She fed it carefully, then lit the stove as the kettle began to tremble. Merritt stepped in from the barn, brushing frost from his sleeves. His cheeks were red from the wind, and he smelled faintly of hay and horses. "Old sorrel threw a shoe," he said, tugging off his gloves. "I'll need to ride into Red Lodge for iron and nails come morning." She nodded while pouring the hot water over the grounds. "Will you stay the night in town?" "No, if I leave at first light I'll be back by dusk." He looked at her. "You'd rather I didn't stay away?" She didn't answer right off. Instead, she moved to the table with the mugs. "I prefer the quiet when I choose it," she said finally. "Not when it's left behind like a coat forgotten at a door." His eyes softened. "I'll be back before the sun's gone." "You'll not be left to silence you didn't ask for." She met his gaze with something steadier than before. "Good." They ate in companionable silence, the rhythm of their days now layered with quiet understanding. She knew how he liked his eggs, how he didn't speak until he'd had coffee, how his way of showing concern was to fix things: a creaking hinge, a loose board, a look in her eyes he couldn't name but wanted to ease. Later, he brought her a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. "Found this in the saddlebag." Meant to give it sooner. Inside was a pair of wool-lined gloves, clearly secondhand but mended with care. "They're warm," she said, slipping them on, "and they fit. They ought to. Measured against your old pair last time you left them by the hearth." She studied him. "You notice more than you let on." "I notice what matters." That evening, she sat at the work table mending a feed sack while Merritt carved a new latch for the barn door. His pocketknife moved in even strokes, and she watched the way his hands shaped the wood. There was something calming in the way he worked, not for show, but to make things whole again. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked without looking up. "Once or twice," he said. "Was younger then, thought there might be more out there. Turns out I wanted something that stayed put." She set aside her stitching. "You ever regret not marrying?" He didn't hesitate. "I never met someone who made the thought feel like something I wanted for my own. Not until now." Her breath caught. "That's not a small thing to say." "I don't say small things," he said, setting down the latch. "And I don't ask for more than what someone's ready to give." She rose, walked to him, and placed her hand over his. "I have nothing fine to offer. No dowry. No name anyone remembers with favor. I'm not asking for fine," he said, "just honest. I can be that." "Then stay," he said simply. "Not as a guest, not just because I offered a roof. Stay because you want to build something here with me." She searched his face, saw no hesitation, no charity, only the same quiet steadiness that had welcomed her from the start. She nodded once. "I'll stay." He reached for her hand, then leaned forward and kissed her again, slower this time, not as a promise but as something already growing between them, rooted deep. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside the world felt warm. By early January, the days had shortened to a pale sliver of light between long hours of snow and fire glow. Joanna had grown used to the hush of winter life on the ranch, the way the frost made the window panes bloom with patterns when the wind howled through the valley. The way Merritt's footsteps sounded heavier on the porch after a full day out with the livestock. They had begun to move in rhythm, not just around the house, but within each other's silences. That morning, Merritt returned from checking the southern pasture with a folded telegram in his coat pocket and a new crease between his brows. He set his gloves on the table before she could ask. "You expecting news?" she said, kneeling to stir the fire. "Not for myself," he answered, then added with a glance, "It's from Livingston. They're asking for help driving cattle east come spring. A neighbor of mine sent my name." Joanna stood. "Will you go?" He leaned against the table, arms crossed. "Not certain yet. It's a long haul, near 2 months gone, and the foothills'll still be thawing when they set out." She dried her hands on her apron. "You'd make good money, some. Enough to put toward another team or a roof patch come summer." He studied her. "But it'd mean leaving you here alone." "I'm not helpless. I know that," he said. "But I'd rather not ride out knowing you're left to fend for yourself through the last of winter." Joanna took a slow breath. "Would you want me to come?" His brow lifted slightly. "It's a rough trail. Cold nights, no guarantee of shelter. Not what I'd ask of someone unless they were set on it." "I asked what you wanted," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "If you came, I'd sleep easier." She looked toward the window, where the snow had started again, soft and steady. "Then we'll prepare." Later, she bundled herself and walked out to the barn. The mule stall needed reinforcing, and Merritt had spoken of trading the old harness before spring. She ran her hand along the feed trough, thinking not just of the road ahead, but of what it meant to be asked, what it meant to be wanted not for labor or duty, but as a partner. That night, Merritt brought out a worn canvas map and spread it across the table. They leaned over it together, his finger trailing from Red Lodge east toward Miles City. "Most of the trail's open," he said, tapping the Yellowstone River line. "But this stretch here floods easy. If the thaw comes early, we'll have to detour north." Joanna traced the path with her eyes. "What about the other riders?" "4 men from the valley," he replied. "I know 3. The fourth's a boy from Bozeman, just turned 20. They'll ride ahead to scout if needed." She nodded, then pointed to a small dot beyond the river. "What's there?" "Old trading post. Might not be much left of it, but it's good for a night's rest if the weather turns." She looked at him. "Have you done this drive before?" "Once, 5 years back. Wasn't planning to again." He met her gaze. "But I wasn't building a life back then." Joanna pressed her hand lightly to the edge of the map. "Then we planned together." After supper, he brought down a cedar box from the loft. Inside were a set of trail journals, a compass, and a small tin of dried chicory. "I kept these from the last drive," he said. "Didn't think I'd use them again." She turned the compass over in her hand. "I'd like to learn how to read this." He nodded toward her chair. "Sit. I'll show you." They sat close, shoulders brushing as he explained the markings, his voice low and patient. Outside, the wind picked up, but inside, the lantern light held steady. When she returned the compass to the box, she didn't move away. "I want to be useful out there." "You are," he said. "Even now." She looked up at him. "I don't want to just follow. I want to understand what we're doing." Merritt reached over and took her hand, the rough warmth of his palm grounding her. "Then I'll teach you what I know. And you'll tell me what I don't." The next morning, they began sorting supplies. She cataloged flour and salt while he checked saddle cinches and oiled the tack. They packed in measured silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled to feel like something shared. In the evenings, he taught her how to tie knots for securing gear and how to read the sky for storms. She showed him how to mend a wool sock without bunching the heel and how to line a coat with scrap flannel. One night, as they sat near the fire, she looked up from her stitching. "When we come back, what then?" Merritt didn't answer right away. He set aside the bit he'd been sharpening, wiped his hands, and turned to face her. "Then I build the addition like we talked." She blinked. "You've been thinking on that." "Thought I'd start with a kitchen pantry. Then a second room." "For what?" "For whatever comes next," he said. "If that's just us, fine. If you want more." She set down her sewing. "I do." A quiet passed between them like a held breath. "Then we'll build it," he said simply. She moved to sit beside him on the rug, close enough to feel the warmth of his body. He slid an arm around her, and she rested against him, her cheek to his shoulder. No vows, no ceremony, but the promise was there, solid and steady as the land beneath them. The snow fell outside, burying the world in silence. Inside, their future had begun to take shape, one step, one plan, one shared breath at a time. They left before dawn. The sky was still deep blue, unbroken but for the pale edge of morning licking at the ridges. Frost crackled under the horse's hooves as Joanna tightened the strap on her bedroll and checked the saddle cinch again. Merritt gave her a glance from across the yard, then mounted up without a word, the quiet between them filled with what didn't need saying. They were riding out together. That was the shape of it. The other riders gathered near the creek bend, their breath clouding in the cold. 2 were older than Merritt, one with a limp that didn't seem to hinder him much, and the third a wiry fellow with a sun-dark face and a constant twitch in his jaw. The fourth was the boy Merritt had mentioned, barely grown, with a rifle too long for his arms and a face not yet hardened by the road. None of them looked surprised to see Joanna in the saddle. "You ride strong?" the eldest asked, turning toward her with a look that was more testing than unkind. "Well enough to keep up," she said. He nodded once. "That'll do." They set off east with the herd moving slow behind them, the air brittle and clean. Merritt rode beside her, his gaze sweeping the land more than her, though now and then he'd point out a bend in the trail or a trick of the slope that could trip a tired horse. She listened, memorizing the way the land spoke if you knew how to hear it. By midday, the sun had begun to soften the snow, and the sound of meltwater echoed faint through the gullies. They stopped near a stand of cottonwoods to rest the cattle. Joanna stretched her legs, rolling her shoulders as she watched the boy from Bozeman fumble with his saddlebag. "First time out?" she asked, crouching beside the fire Merritt had coaxed to life. He nodded, then seemed to think better of a short answer. "Pa ran horses, but I never rode this far. They said I'd learn fast." Merritt handed him a tin of beans. "You will. Just stay with the herd and keep your eyes open. You'll be fine." The boy looked at Joanna, then back at Merritt. "You two married?" Joanna didn't flinch. "Not yet." The boy flushed. "Oh, I didn't mean it's all right," she said, offering him a corner of her bread. "Some things take shape in their own time." That night, they camped beneath a bluff where the wind cut low and steady through the grass. Merritt built the fire high, and they all ate in silence except for the occasional cough or scrape of tin. Joanna sat close to the flames, her knees drawn up, watching shadows shift on Merritt's face as he checked the herd's count in his ledger. "You always keep record?" she asked, her voice low. His pencil paused. "Started after my second winter here. Lost 6 head to sickness, never saw it coming. Writing it down keeps me honest." "About what?" "About what I missed. What I might miss again." She nodded, then lay back in her bedroll, the stars sharp and endless overhead. Merritt didn't speak again, but she could hear the scratch of his pencil long after the others had fallen asleep. The days stretched on. They crossed frozen creeks and narrow draws where the cattle moved slow and stubborn. Joanna learned to gauge the herd's mood by their gait, learned which one would bolt at the scent of wolves, which one needed coaxing at every river crossing. One afternoon, the boy's saddle girth snapped during a slope descent. His horse bucked, and he tumbled hard down the ridge. Joanna was off her mount before the dust settled, kneeling beside him as he groaned. "Don't move," she said, brushing snow from his jacket. "Tell me where it hurts." "Ankle," he said through clenched teeth, "and maybe my pride." She glanced up as Merritt arrived, already tying off the reins of the boy's horse. "We'll set camp early," Merritt said. "He'll need a few days' rest." The others grumbled, but no one argued. They'd seen how the boy had tried. That counted for something. That evening, Joanna wrapped the boy's ankle, her fingers gentle but sure. "You learned this from someone?" he asked. "My mother," she said. "She kept goats. A sprained leg meant no milk." "We learned fast." Merritt watched from across the fire, his expression unreadable, but his eyes lingered. Later, when the others had gone quiet, Merritt walked with her to the edge of the bluff where the sky opened wide and clear. "You didn't hesitate today," he said. "There wasn't time to," he nodded slowly. "I forget sometimes how much you've already carried." She turned toward him. "You don't treat me like I'm breakable. I never saw you that way." She reached for his hand, and he took it without question, their fingers tangling in the dark. "You still want this," she said, not as doubt but as something that needed saying. He looked at her then, really looked. "I want a life that's built slow, honest. You're part of that now." She leaned into his side, her head resting against his shoulder. "Then let's keep building." They stood that way for a long time, the herd breathing soft below them, the night wind rising low through the grass. Whatever lay ahead, they'd meet it side by side. By the third week, the land had changed. The snow thinned to crusts in the shadows, and bare earth showed beneath the hooves of the herd. Distant tree lines darkened with thaw, and the rivers ran louder. The trail grew easier in ways, though the cold still clung to mornings and the cattle moved slower, muddying at every bend. Joanna kept watch at the rear of the herd while Merritt rode ahead with the others. She'd learned to read the shift in the animal's pace, to spot when one had gone lame or wandered too far toward the brush. The boy with the healing ankle now rode beside her, his limp easing more each day. "You always live out this way?" he asked once, his voice low so as not to startle the cattle. "No," she said. "I was raised east of the Missouri, near a river settlement, gone now, flood, fire." He didn't ask more, and she didn't offer detail. He was young enough not to know the look of what couldn't be spoken and old enough not to press. That night, Merritt kept close to the herd while the others made camp. Joanna brought him a tin of stew, kneeling beside him as he checked a calf's hoof. "She's favoring it," he said. "Might be stone bruised. I'll watch her in the morning." He looked up. "You don't need to stay out here." "I want to," she said. "You've been on your feet since before light." He stood then, brushing the dirt from his coat. "You're keeping pace like you were born to it." "I'm not," she said. "But I've learned to carry what I'm given." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "When we get back, I've been thinking we could set the addition near the south wall. Better sun." She blinked. "You've already planned it, most of it." He hesitated. "I was waiting to know if you'd stay." She stepped closer. "You know now." He reached for her hand, rough palm settling over hers. "I do." They didn't speak again that night, but when they returned to camp, they lay their bedrolls side by side for the first time. The last days of the drive passed without trouble. The herd was delivered east of Miles City, the cattle tallied and payment made in coin and goods. Merritt traded for a new harness, a crate of seed potatoes, and a hand-forged drawknife. They loaded their supplies onto the packhorse, and the other riders headed north while Merritt and Joanna turned back west. The ride home took longer. They didn't rush. The thaw had softened the trail, and wild geese passed overhead in long, honking lines. They camped beside a stream one night, the trees budding with the first blush of green. Merritt sat beside her on the bank, whittling a handle from a strip of ash wood. "I'd like to build a coop this season," he said. "Keep hens again." She smiled. "I can tend them." "I know," he said. "I want to build it anyway." She rested her head against his shoulder. "You think we'll make a quiet life. I think we'll make a steady one." They reached the ranch just after the first week of April. The river ran swift, and the hills were patched with green. The house stood just as they'd left it, save for a few branches blown against the fence. Inside, the hearth was cold, but the walls still held the scent of wood smoke and home. Joanna opened the shutters while Merritt brought in their bags. Sunlight poured across the floor, and dust motes danced like sparks in the air. "I'll start the fire," she said. "I'll bring in water." They moved around each other with ease, like threads woven into the same cloth. That night, they ate on the porch with their plates balanced on their knees, watching the sky turn gold. Merritt wiped his hands on a linen square, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, smooth band of silver. "I bartered for this in town," he said, holding it out. "Didn't know if you'd want ceremony." She took it, the weight of it simple and sure. "I want you, that's enough." He slid it onto her finger. "You have me." She leaned in and kissed him, the kind of kiss that felt like roots settling deep into the earth. That spring they built the addition. Merritt cut the lumber himself, and Joanna helped hoist the beams, her hands calloused and strong. The south wall caught the morning sun, just as he'd planned. She planted rows of onions and beans near the porch. He repaired the fence line, and they took turns splitting firewood. The coop went up that summer, and Merritt brought home 6 hens and a rooster too proud for his own good. Joanna laughed more often. Merritt did too. By autumn, the second room was finished. It held shelves, a writing desk, and a rocking chair she'd found at a neighbor's sale. They filled it with books, dried herbs, and a cradle they built together, though neither of them said why. Not yet. One evening, as the first frost clung to the edges of the windows, Merritt came in from the barn with a new wool coat over his arm. "For you," he said. It's time you had something that fits right. Bought, not borrowed. Joanna ran her fingers over the stitching. You're still learning how to give. I'm still learning how to keep, he said, voice quiet. She stepped into his arms, the firelight flickering across the floor. They stood that way while the wind curled around the corners of the house, warm inside, full of the kind of stillness that wasn't empty, but whole. And that was how they lived side by side, through seasons that changed but never took anything from them they hadn't chosen to give. Merritt Shaw and Joanna Kessler built their life not on grand moments, but on the slow, steady kind. Shared work, seeded rows, and the quiet certainty of two people who found one another when the world had nearly forgotten them, and neither of them was ever lost again.